Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Vera Tarman and I'm back again to talk about, yes, food addiction, yet again. And today specifically, I would like to talk about willpower. And basically, we hear this line with people, especially when they're coming into this world for the first time, the addiction world in general, including the food addiction world. I'm not powerless. That's not a good way for me to think about it. I have to think that I have power. And, especially when we look at things like alcohol and people go into a 12-step program and the first step is, hi, I'm Vera, I'm powerless over my addiction to alcohol or food or whatever it is. And people just go, I'm not powerless. Don't say that. And anyway, I want to say, yes, you are powerless. It's actually it's a trick question. You have power and you also don't have power. And I want to talk about willpower, which is the power that we think we have when we say, I don't want to be feeling powerless. And probably if you're already here, listening to my talk, and maybe you've taken the course already or you've thought about food addiction, you're already on board. So then just listen, or think about the days when you just couldn't buy into this concept of feeling powerless, because I want to talk about why you are powerless, but still with some power. It's really just, it's smart power. It's figure out where your power is and where it isn't. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about, again, the biology behind this powerlessness. And what we're talking about when we talk about addiction of any sort, including sugar, including in some cases for many people, it's more than just sugar, but it might start with sugar. We're talking about something called the limbic system. And the limbic system is in the middle part of the brain, so it's sort of like between my ears, behind my nose kind of thing, that part of the brain. It is our instinctual reward pathway. And this is, if we think about the brain as having three parts, there's the lower part, which is the, reptilian or vegetative brain. It's the part where I don't need to think. I digest food without thinking. I breathe without thinking. I'm awake without thinking about being awake, that part of the brain. And then there's the middle part of the brain, which is my sort of unconscious, but still semi-conscious thoughts and desires and dislikes, and it's that part of the brain that fuels and makes the lower part of the brain work. And really, we only need those two parts of the brain to be alive. That's life. And then the third part of the brain, the top of the brain, that's called the higher order functioning. And that's the part that kind of makes me different than my beloved doggie, which somebody mentioned in the chat. Hello. As adorable as she is, she's a dog and she doesn't think that much. She just knows, oh, Vera's coming, that means food. Oh, Vera's in a bad mood, stay away. Like that level of thinking. But the ability to say, you know what, I don't think I should do this, or basically anything that requires more than three words. This is the limbic system. This is the middle part of the brain. And it's there to make sure that I do things that will keep me alive. And then that's the limbic system. And then the top part of the brain, it's the finesse. It's the, if I want to do things that will keep me alive, well, I want to be polite about it. I want to be diplomatic. I want to be maybe manipulative. I want to be social about it, that part of the brain. And that's where willpower sits. So willpower is in the higher order functioning. It's in the forehead, what we call the frontal lobe. And it is, a very nice way for us to think that I'm better than my dog. And, I will behave better than my dog. And we have willpower. We do have willpower. There is some level of willpower, but it's very, very time limited. And in the larger picture of the brain, it is the slowest kid on the block. It's the weakest link in the chain. It's the most newly evolved and doesn't have a whole lot of power in the context of everything else. Which has the most power? The reptilian lower part of my brain. And then the next part is my instinctual reward pathway and avoidant pathway. That has much more power. And then willpower is there. It makes me feel better and more willing to behave, so I can use willpower. It moderates my behavior, but it does not control my behavior. Maybe that's the best way to say it. It can moderate behavior, but it cannot control behavior. I often say to people, when you think about willpower, it has a lifespan which we call frontal lobe fatigue or ego depletion. It has a lifespan that's very limited. I can be in an animal primal mode, that's the limbic system, the whole day. In fact, I probably am most of the day. But that frontal lobe part where the cognition is, it's very exhausting, brain-wise, energy-wise, and certainly emotionally-wise, because emotions are in the middle part of the brain. So it's very time limited and it's very fragile. And I often will say it's probably about 20 minutes. It's not just me who says it, but I guess this is kind of what we generally think. It's about 20 minutes of juice, maybe a half an hour. Somebody who meditates, maybe they have 40 minutes. It's very time limited. And I often say it's like, if you have an allergy and you're having an allergic reaction, you quickly get your EpiPen, which gives you, because allergic reaction means that the lymph tissue and the sort of whole immune system is on fire trying to get this allergen out of your body, and it can be so much that it can kill you. That's an anaphylactic reaction. It's so profound that you can't even breathe anymore because it's so profound. It's trumped your life force. So you take an EpiPen, which gives adrenaline, and that kind of slows that process down for 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour. And then if the allergen was quite significant, the allergy comes back. And so you need another EpiPen, which is not a good idea. So usually you have that 20 minutes to rush off to the emergency so that there they can give you a proper adrenaline, they can put you on the machines, et cetera, and keep you alive until that allergen goes. So willpower is like that EpiPen. It's a short-lived thing for you to use your time, that 20 minutes or half an hour, if you're lucky 40 minutes, to do what you have to do until you're safe. Another analogy I like to say is like Narcan and somebody who's having an opiate overdose. The drug that they've taken, maybe it's fentanyl or something, they're overdosing. And if somebody happens to walk by and give them the Narcan injection or whatever way that they do it, they come back for 20 minutes or maybe a half an hour. And if there's so much fentanyl in the system, they go down again unless they're given the Narcan again. So willpower is short-lived, but guess what? You only get one go. It's not like you can get another go because you throw in another injection. No, you get one go. So it's a precious commodity. So yes, we have willpower, but not very much. And alternatively, in our primal system, that power is running. It's an engine that's going all the time. And if it wasn't going, we'd be dead. So we don't really need willpower and we don't get much of it. So that's the general biology of this. So what does that translate to in addiction? We have addiction in that middle part of the brain. I said that's the primal part, the instinctual part, the reward part. We have two parts of the brain, the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens, and both of them are geared to keeping me alive, as I said. And that's normal. That's not enhanced with food or drug. That's just normal. And if you were to say to somebody under normal circumstances, well, this isn't going to be normal circumstance, but not a drug-related circumstance, I have a gun to your face and I'm telling you not to be afraid, there is nothing willpower-wise that's going to say, I'm not afraid. You might be able to not run if you're a soldier and you've learned how to handle all of your emotional dysregulation that's happening at that time, but you're still going to be frightened, you're still going to be freaked out, you're still going to be responding. Like you may not physically respond, but you will be responding in your head. And willpower is like saying, if you say to somebody, don't do something, hold tight and don't do it, it's like telling somebody, don't be afraid when there's a gun in your face. Like we can't do it. It's not written in our DNA. It's not written in our neurology. We have to be afraid. So you take a drug that enhances that experience, it's like a gun in your face, but it's not a gun in your face. It's a trigger. If I've trained, not intentionally, but I have unintentionally trained myself to that when I have this substance, which let's pretend it's sugar, it's actually black coffee, it's not sugar, but let's pretend it's sugar, and I have a distress and I take that and it goes away, I've taught myself this works. And so this is now a life-saving measure. And when I see that coffee cup and I'm under distress, we have a trigger that tells me life-saving measure, or this is a good experience. Great, that's the connection. So now if I've made that connection and I'm under stress, remember, it's like a gun in your face. Don't take it. Of course you're gonna want to take it. You may not actually take it, but you're going to want to take it. And you can't tell somebody you don't do that. It's like asking somebody to turn off their instinctual response, which has now been turned on. I've trained it that I need this substance to get a good effect. Having said that, it's kind of like the biology. Why is it that some people can say no and others can't? This is where we can talk about the stages of food addiction. Somebody who comes in and they're not quite really, they may be just struggling with sugar, but they can eat all sorts of other things. They might even be able to have a little bit of sugar, but they struggle a bit. And then there's the other person, they just have a little bit and they're off into a binge until tomorrow morning. Does that person have less willpower than the other person? The phenomenon of addiction is, you could call it the stages if you want to divide it into like early, middle, late stages of food addiction, or you can just see it as the dynamic of addiction itself. Think about the first time you've had sugar. You're feeling the pleasure of, oh, that was really nice. And I'm not talking about food addiction. This is like early days when you were introduced to sugar. And for those of you who aren't sure if you're sugar addicts and think you can put it down, you might be in early days. And by the way, we believe this is a chronic condition, and early, we say yet. Eventually you will become so if you continue to expose yourself to these toxic substances, overwhelming substances. So there you are, you're having it and you're able to stop. Why is it that you can stop? Because if you're early days, addiction is actually two dynamics. It's the first part, which is the euphoricness. People don't pick up sugar initially because they have to. They pick it up because, oh, it's nice and I like it, and why wouldn't I have it? And yes, I can stop when I want. So there's a kind of euphoric, what we call a honeymoon phase. Happens with all drugs. Alcohol, you can do that for years. Something like cocaine, crack, not for very long at all, maybe just a couple of weeks. But there's a honeymoon phase. And with sugar, there's a honeymoon phase. You haven't quite yet. You're still in that euphoric piece. But there is a line when you're continually exposed. And for those of you who have heard me talk before, you'll know that there's the definition of addiction is craving, tolerance, dependence. There's a thing that happens. You're continually exposed to an environment that is overtaxing, overwhelming. Your brain is going to make you become tolerant to that substance, and then eventually you become dependent. This is just a phenomena. It's actually the brain doing itself. It's a normal reaction in an abnormal environment. And so there it is. It's making that change. And there's a line. Who knows exactly what that line is? It's different for each person. Where a person crosses, and now it's not just euphoric effect. I like the sugar, yes, but actually I'm not getting that much pleasure anymore out of the sugar. It's not. I have to have a lot to have even a little bit of pleasure. I'm eating it now because I have to. I will have withdrawal if I don't. So we have the triggering effect, the euphoric effect, which triggers the nucleus accumbens, which is our pleasure area. And after you've been using for a while, that kind of fades down, and then the second phase moves in, and that's where you use because you have to, and that's triggering the amygdala, which means if I don't use, I'm going to feel awful. In other words, there's a gun to my face. In other words, I'm going to feel like I will die if I don't have this. I mean, we don't really think we're going to die, but I won't sleep. I'll be crabby. I won't be able to work. I won't be able to sit in my skin, which is basically a mini panic attack, all the way to a big panic attack, which is triggering that amygdala, which is that negative stress response. And people will use just to quiet that down. That sort of progression of addiction from euphoria to it's what we really call in the world of psychology, one is positive reinforcement and one is negative reinforcement. And when it moves from positive to negative, you're getting hooked. And that's the person in the later stage of food addiction who cannot say no. The other ones still can because if they don't, they're not going to have a hard night because they're not yet that addicted. They're just not going to have their pleasant experience. This person, they don't even care about the pleasant experience, but they want to have the rest of their day go well. And that's the difference. Now, where does willpower fit into that? Okay, it might happen in the person that has a bit of euphoric, like they're still in early stages. But in the later stages, when the amygdala is engaged and panic is engaged and the fear of, if I don't have this, what will I do, is engaged, willpower doesn't cut it. And it doesn't cut it. If you are a super chill person, you might, like I said, have 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but that's under normal circumstances. When you're using a drug and, food may not be as powerful or potent in the immediate sense as crystal meth or a drug like that, it certainly does in the long term have an effect. But nevertheless, you're still responding from that negative reinforcement or later stage of addiction. And willpower, even in the best of times, now instead of 20 minutes or half an hour, you might have 5 minutes. That's it. And a lot of people will. They'll have a little and then they'll think, oh, I had a bit, that was okay. What's Vera talking about? I'm fine. And then before they know it, half an hour later, they're thinking, oh, geez, and I was able to have a little bit the cravings, the conniving, all that kind of thinking, which is essentially the dopamine reigniting itself. Dopamine is, of course, the engine of addiction. And it doesn't say, well, dopamine, it's a little chatter that's in the head. It's the, what's in the fridge, all that kind of niggling thinking that's happening in the head. That's basically the cravings coming back and the addiction hitting. So if you have a little bit of something, you might immediately go crazy, or it'll be a slow crazy, but it'll happen. It will happen unless you're in the early stages. And where does willpower fit in? Well, like I said, a little bit in the early stages, not very much in the later stages. So what can we take away with this information? That willpower is at its best 20-30 minutes in a day, at its worst maybe 5 minutes. We have willpower, but it's not running the show. It's certainly not for very long. So what can we do as a takeaway? When we talk about addiction treatment, we talk about obviously stopping the substance. And you want to stop the substance so that you can get out of the grip of the substance and then start to learn tools to stay off the substance. And even though you may no longer be eating the food, those cravings and that mental, all the games that we play, that takes a while to settle. And in long-term sobriety, it's usually a year or two before those thoughts really, you're going to have to kind of battle them or be aware of their tricksterness for probably, a year or two or something like that. But it doesn't mean that you're like white knuckling it, but you're aware of it. Basically what we're doing is we've stopped the substance, now we're into recovery mode, and we're doing what we call relapse prevention. So what do I have to do to relapse prevent relapse? I have to identify my triggers, number one. And then when the triggers come, first of all, I'm going to try to avoid them, because the moment they're in my face, I got 5 minutes before I'm going to say yes. So I'm going to do whatever I can to not have them in my face. Get rid of them in the house. If we have food buddies, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing you for the next year, or if I do see you, it's not around food. You do whatever you can to get rid of those triggers. That's the first thing. Recognizing that you don't want to challenge yourself because you only got 5 minutes. Okay, so then when you are in a circumstance and you only have 5 minutes, the next thing you want to do is have a plan. And we talk about this all the time in the addiction world. Plan, prepare, protect. I'm going to a wedding, it's going to be a ton of food there, I'm going to my own birthday party, and even though I say don't bring food, they're going to bring it for me anyway. What am I going to do? I've got 5 minutes, I've got a plan. I've planned this already, so I'm going to make sure that I'm full. That might be one thing. I don't plan to eat it all, so that I'm going to have a thing that I'm going to say, thank you very much, I've already eaten, I'll have it later, or I'm not eating it, whatever it is that you're going to do. You have to have something in place. And if worse comes to worse, we always say you want to have a support system, which might be somebody that you can call, you pull out your phone, or you somebody that you're with, and you say, look, I'm running out of my 5 minutes. Can you please help me? And so that they will come and essentially be your willpower for you. There's going to be people who say, I'm not asking somebody to help me. I'm an adult. I'm going to do this myself. That's somebody who still believes they have willpower. And they do for 5 minutes. And then they don't have that willpower anymore. I'm sorry. This is one of those things where you just got to accept. Like we say, I admit that I'm powerless over my substance and my life has become unmanageable. That's why it's step 1 in the 12 steps. It's the first thing. And every time you pick up, it means you still think you can manage somewhere. You still think you got a little bit of willpower. I'm telling you, you do. 5 minutes. And circumstances out there are more than 5 minutes long, especially if it's a food pusher. So you want to have support. Basically, the fundamental thing is you have power to control your environment. I'm going to plan, prepare, protect. I'm going to make sure I have supports. I'm going to eat ahead of time. I'm going to do all these things. There's where my willpower is full. I get to use it as much as I want because it's not being challenged. And then when I'm in the circumstance, I've already got a plan. I'm not using willpower except to use the plan. My willpower is to use the plan. And of course, you're not going to want to because you're going to feel like a fool to say, hey, can you sit beside me because somebody just brought something and I'm nervous I'm going to eat something. I mean, nobody wants to do that. But you're going to use the 3 minutes left that you have to ask somebody to come and sit beside you because when that's gone, then it's okay. They're sitting beside you, or you've got the plan and you're following the plan. So, willpower. In the face of addiction, nix, does not exist. Outside of addiction, when you plan ahead, lots of willpower. So we want to use our resources wisely And this is just good human nature, understanding human nature on top of addiction, which just makes bad things even worse. In terms of takeaways, recognize the triggers and protect yourself from them. Make sure you have good support. Make sure you know how to build boundaries. Boundaries are so important. And so that they're all in your face in that 5 minutes when you need them.